right. Well, hello everybody. Thank you. All right, one last session and then it's lunchtime. So thank you to the Centre for Native Title Anthropology for the opportunity to speak at this conference. It's a fantastic opportunity. It's wonderful to be back at the University of Queensland on Turrbal and Yagara country. I was last at UQ 25 years ago. Since then, Meanjin, Brisbane has changed a lot. The buildings in the CBD are much taller. I was walking along the river last night and there's some big black building in the city that looks like it's been based on a food processor. I don't know what that's about. Yeah, there's heaps more bridges in the city crossing the river, but despite these changes, there is much that's remained the same. The river that this city was built around continues to meander its way to the coast, and those hills are just as challenging as ever for bike riders. The Central Land Council in Alice Springs has also grown and changed. And while there have been some changes to the Aboriginal land rights legislation that established the organisation, and we're now working under native title as well, the anthropologists and lawyers are no longer pursuing land claims. The work of the anthropologist is, in essence, largely unchanged. Our role is to document the traditional land tenure system in operation, understand how people connect to country, who has the authority to, based on traditional land tenure, to make decisions about country, and a discussion about any exceptions to the rule, explaining the legitimacy of those exceptions. In this presentation, I'll introduce you to the Central Land Council, also CLC or Land Council, reflecting on the organisation that I started working at in mid-2002 and how it is now, looking through the lens of gender at the council and the employees, especially management, touching on how we manage gender-restricted information, the work we are doing on repatriation and return of information, and some thoughts on the future. The first meeting of the Central Land Council was at Amungana in 1974. The early council and the associated organisation involved a lot of men, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. The non-Indigenous political sphere at the time was, as we know, male-dominated, and I do wonder what influence the gendered non-Indigenous political sphere at the time had on the Indigenous political movement and the organisations that were established back in the 1970s. The CLC exists in two spheres. There's the Council of 90 elected delegates who represent communities and homelands or outstations from the 777,000 square kilometres of land, divided into 9 sub-regions, broadly grouped along language lines, noting that there are over 15 different languages spoken in the CLC region. The council members meet several times a year to discuss issues and concerns of those they represent, often inviting politicians and senior bureaucrats to answer questions. The council also provides policy direction for the organisation that's known as the CLC. The council has had around 15 chairs and likely more deputies in the 50 plus years since it was established. Of those 15 or so chairs, can you guess how many of those have been women? 0. And deputy chairs, I can recall only 2 from the 23 plus years that I've been at the CLC. Portraits of the former chairs hang in the conference room at the main office in Alice Springs, but the deputies are not commemorated in any publicly visible way. There's an executive, which is made up of 1 elected representative from each of the 9 sub-regions, plus the chair and deputy chair. Here you can see we've got 2 women. One is the deputy chair, Barb Shaw, and the other is Valerie Martin, and the rest are men. Wonderful men, but yeah, still men. Okay, the executive has an important governance role, meeting 8 times a year to pass resolutions for the specific work of the organisation, directing land trusts to to affix seals for agreements on Aboriginal land trusts, endorsing proof of Aboriginality forms and various other matters. The executive has generally tended to be male-dominated, some terms more than others. With the photos of all the male former chairs on the wall of every meeting of the executive, it feels a little like those all-male photos may have a self-perpetuating element on the council. But then again, the wider political context has also been very much male-dominated. We have only had one female Prime Minister after all. The other sphere of the CLC is the organisation, currently headed by a Chief Executive Officer, with an executive management team made up of 3 general managers, 2 of whom are women. 50% of the manager roles these days are held by women. In the anthropology section, about 50% of the regional positions, and all 4 senior positions and the manager role are held by women at the moment. In 2002, the majority of the managers at the CLC were men, and most of those were called David. Here we've got David Wilson, David Alexander, Roger Barnes, David Jagger, David Avery, and of course David Ross. In terms of managing gender-restricted information in 2002, reports were written on computer as opposed to typewriters as they were in the 80s. Filing was a combination of electronic documents saved onto a shared drive and hard copies filed on a physical file. By the time I started with the CLC, the electronic filing system had been in place for a couple of years, and much like what we have today, access permissions and rules linked to a person's profile were in place. So a regional anthropologist could not access the electronic files of the senior anthro or the manager, and along with staff seniority levels, there were also restrictions based on gender, with some men-only electronic folders and a women-only electronic folder. So when digging around on the shared drive, it was not possible to accidentally open documents that were gender-restricted or contained gender-restricted information. We still use we use a different electronic document system these days, but it has a similar back-end access permission for gender and seniority. In the anthropology section, we still use physical copies of reports when researching land interests. The catalogue system identifies gender-restricted reports in a number of ways. In the title line of the catalogue, and in case you missed that, there's an additional line of red text in the catalogue, and then the actual report has something like this. If there are reports that are catalogued as gender restricted for an area a regional anthro is researching, a colleague in the anthropology section will read the report and provide a summary of the relevant non-gendered information. Away from the office, in the field, the landscape can be gendered, with restrictions on who can enter areas or places that may be open but have gender-restricted stories associated with them. Some groups, more than others, maintain a physical distance between men and women. I attended a meeting at Yuendamu about 15 years ago, maybe longer, where a petition was set up down the middle of the table. One side was for men, the other side for women. I believe this line was also about avoidance relationships across the generations, maybe more so than keeping the genders strictly separated. When out in the field, these avoidance relations are managed by the women, making sure that we park a distance from the men, or the men to be avoided, and if the men are driving past, the women duck down in their seats to avoid seeing those men. And at meetings, men and women sit some distance from each other. When working with groups on land matters, gender can be raised. I was told by a senior Aranda woman, women don't talk about land matters. But thinking about this, there were a number of factors that may have led her to make this statement. At the time, she had some older brothers. I was relatively young. This was 20 years ago. And it was the first time she and I had worked together, so she may have felt that she needed to school me. When land claims were the primary business of the Central Land Council, land claim hearings were dominated by non-Indigenous men, the Land Commissioner, and the lawyers, both for the claimants and for the court, were by and large men. Some claims were researched by female as well as male anthropologists, but some claims in the CLC region were researched only by male anthropologists. Again, I reflect on what effect did the male dominance amongst the staff have on thoughts about who should be speaking for country. Despite male staff dominating land claim hearings, women often spoke at these hearings about their attachment to country, as well as speaking on genealogical matters, and they demonstrated attachment through showing ceremony. When I was searching the CLC's digital archives for photos to show for this presentation, there were so many photos of women dancing to celebrate land being handed back, and photos of women proudly holding title. This contrasted with the photos of the council meetings, which were dominated by men. I again question what role did the gendered political sphere of non-Indigenous society have on the political sphere of the Indigenous society. I've worked on a few native title claims as a researcher and research assistant. On a couple of field trips, some groups of claimants got a bit upset that the lead car on the first day of country visits was full of women. So we let the men take the lead, only to get called up to ask that old lady if she can take us to those sites. In one instance, the area that the men were looking for was a site that we were told was men only, but a senior woman was required to locate the site. She had spent time living in that area. We were told the place was dangerous for women of childbearing age, and she was well past those times, so that was another reason for it being seen as appropriate for her to show those men where that men only site was. So reflecting on that, I would say that women dance country and they sing country, they paint country, so yeah, you bet they talk about country. These days we get requests from constituents for maps. We don't have a policy at this stage for responding to these requests beyond saying we don't provide land claim maps to individuals. In 2022, a new role was created, Senior Anthropologist for Major Projects and Repatriation. The manager of the anthropology section, a woman, had been working with a subcommittee of the Council's executive on draft policy for responding to map requests. This was at the behest of a member of the executive committee who requested a site map and was very unhappy with the standard response, and quite rightly. It was long overdue for working on policy around providing materials. Based on the manager's experience working with the subcommittee and the fact that there had been a number of projects over the years around repatriation of sacred objects from institutions, the position was advertised as men only, or maleness was an essential part of the selection criteria. We did a first round of interviews. There was one suitable candidate, but they declined the role. So we advertised a second time. I was acting in the manager role at that time, and one of the regional anthropologists expressed interest as she'd worked on a project returning the bones of an ancestor to country and found it incredibly satisfying. Her being a woman, I was initially like, no, I'm sorry, you can apply, but you will be unlikely to be selected. But we talked about the work a bit more and what they would really be doing, how it could be made to work if a woman were to take it on, hiring a male consultant or supervising in-house anthropologists to work on object repatriation. This did not mean having to physically see or handle the objects. It would be about the administration. The role would also work on the return of information collected during land claims to descendants of people who had given evidence in claims. There have now been 2 women in the senior anthropologist role. Nat Bell, a former computer coder, she set up the processes around the admin aspects of the role and established a proper catalogue for the objects. There's an admin level access for keeping track of objects in the consultations that has no reference to restricted information, just a number and a condition report, noting if there is provenance information or not, and a reference to whether consultations have been finalised, etc., etc. There is also a mail-only access, which includes, I'm told, photos and details of the consults. Natalie appreciated the importance of systems and process. Without her in that role, if the first person, the male that we had offered the role to, had taken it on, I don't think we would have the good, robust admin side that we've got, nor would we have such a workable catalogue. With the subcommittee, she drafted a strong, culturally safe process for accepting objects from members of the public and consulting about where they belong. There's been a growing interest from the public to return objects collected either by themselves or their ancestors, and we needed a system to respond to these requests. And we've had to provide some advice, like please don't just rock up to reception with a box of objects, nor just post unmarked boxes through the mail. So our second senior anthropologist for repatriation, Lily Molt, helped finalise the process for objects. Sorry, this is a photo of the committee. And this is the process. I won't go through it, but as you can see, it's quite detailed. Following our next meeting in March, we'll post a statement on the Land Council website and ask one of our subcommittee members to record for social media a short statement advising the public about these protocols around seeking to return objects. And this year we'll be working with the subcommittee of the Executive on policies around procedures for the return of archival materials. We've got some draft principles here from the committee. I'll skip that bit. We're also looking at storage and viewing space at CLC, which should be ready next year, and the subcommittee has provided some recommendations. In terms of thoughts on the future, we're looking at good, robust, culturally safe processes for the acceptance, storage and consults about objects. We'll soon have clear processes for responding to requests from constituents to access archival information. And our anthropologists, both male and female, will be working on projects to return information to communities, facilitating intergenerational transfer of knowledge about country, on country hopefully, following guidelines established by the subcommittee. As a final thought, as women become more visible in the non-Indigenous political sphere, taking on many of the leadership roles, it would be good to see a woman finally get elected to the chair position on the council, and with no intention to disparage our current CEO, who's been doing great work. It would also be good to see a woman in the CEO role as well. All right, thank you very much for your time.